Hello everyone. So I'm the host today for this session. So my name is Solar. So welcome to the Future Data-Driven Summit 2022. So we have a kind of the barcode here. You can, if you haven't just started to attend our session, you can just start to scan the code. Then you can go to choose whatever session and the topic you like to join. Also, we have our conference team on the Microsoft Teams. So this is a kind of the group. If you scan this barcode, then you can join our teams to have some kind of discussions and get any kind of information about our conference. So secondly, I want to really thanks to all our sponsors, the gold partner, the stream, and also the Pactor, the silver partner with Microsoft, Power BI, the Sentinel, the X agent and the Q associate. Thanks for all this kind of the sponsorships. Everyone's here to make this happen today. Yeah, so I will also drop a link after I close my slides. So we have also kind of the giveaways after the party. So we have different kind of the gift cards and some kind of good books. If you are very interested, just fill the form, then you will get your chance to win all these kind of swags. So finally, I really want to introduce the Erland, the Sommarskog. So yeah, so he is very knowledgeable. I checked his appearance, 20 years over 20 years about the SQL. Yes, I think his life is with the SQL Server. So you will learn also kind of t-sql stuff, especially from the store procedures, from his presentation. Also, I will drop his website in our chat. So if you are interested in any kind of topic about his presentation, you can just go ahead check his content and learn from him. Also, yeah, I just want to thanks for everyone. Also, thank Erland just to give us this presentation today. I will pass my stage to the Erland. Thank you so much.
All right, then I will share my screen again.
Oh yes, go ahead, please, sir.
Okay, so let's see. I'll just try to get rid of this guy.
It's good. I can see your screen.
Yes, I just want to get rid of this Teams thing. It's a little bit complicated because I present from a VM. So sorry about that, folks. Let's go. Okay, so welcome to this session entitled Packaging Permissions in Stored Procedures. So my name is Erland Sommarskog, and I live in Stockholm, where I work as an independent consultant. And as Sola said, I actually work with SQL Server for more than 30 years now, and I've been an MVP for SQL Server or data platforms for more than 20 years. And if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is sql@sommarskog.se. And I think if you don't see that in the chat, so I can drop it again if you don't remember it. So anyway, also I maintain a website, sommarskog.se, which you can see as well as a small collection of large articles, quite long ones that goes in depth in a couple of topics. And one of these articles is actually called Packaging Permissions in Stored Procedures. And you can say this presentation is kind of a teaser or introduction to that article. It's quite long. I did rewrite it a couple of years ago, pushing some of the material to an appendix, thought that the main article would be short, and it turned out that it was actually 40% longer. I think that is because I now explain things a little more slowly. Today's presentation, some of you will think, oh, this was a lot of things at the same time, at once. But reading that article, you can read it in your own pace. But this is kind of get you interested in the whole idea. I'd like to point out that slides and scripts for this session is available on my website, sommarskog.se/present. So what is this thing all about? So let's say this. You have a user, and you want that user to be able to perform a specific action. And that requires the permission X. That could be just select permission on a table, or it could be sysadmin or anything in between. However, you don't want to grant that to the user that permission directly, because that would permit the user to do a lot more you don't want the user to do. I mean, for example, let's say that in the employees table, the user should only be able to read, well, maybe his and his subordinates rows, but not everyone else's rows. Or if it's sysadmin, maybe it's one specific task that requires sysadmin he should be able to do, but not all of it. So would it be practical if we could package that permission inside of the procedure and we have full control of what the user can do? Now you might say, well, wait a minute, isn't that the way it works? Well, okay, there is a very, very common case where it works exactly like this. But it's a very special case, but a very common case. What we're going to learn in this session is how to do it for all the other cases. So this is my agenda. I will start to talk about ownership chaining, which is that very common case and which you might not even think that it actually exists. I will talk about certificate signing, which is the main method to do when ownership chaining is not working for you, and both on database level and server level. Then I will talk about the execute as clause, which some people like better. I not so much, for reasons that you will understand. But also again on database and server level. And the last thing on server level will lead us to the dangers of making a database trustworthy. And at the end, very briefly, I will cover these topics about cross-database access. So let's talk about ownership chaining. This is something that has been in the product, well, at least as long as I've been working with it, and it probably was there in version 1.0. So the way it works is this. If you have a stored procedure, or a view or a function or a trigger, and it exists as an object, and the two objects have the same owner, there is no permission check at all for plain email like select, insert, update, delete, and merge, nor if you call stored procedures or functions. However, ownership chaining does not kick in if you make the access through dynamic SQL. It does not kick in if you query about metadata about the object, nor does it kick in if the operation requires special permissions such as alter. So let's have a look at this. And if I only can get hold of my mouse, and there it is. And no, sorry. Oh, no. Sorry about that, folks. So that's it. Let's move on to Management Studio. And I'm going to start off with setting a couple of things up. So I'm going to start with creating a database called PermTest. And many people don't like having real users owning a database, and that's the right thing. So they make SA their owner. So I'm going to do this. However, I like to point out that directly. In my opinion, that is not a good practice. And I will come back to why. But for the main part of this presentation, SA will own PermTest. Next thing I will do, I will create a test login called Molly, and the password is obladi oblada. Now I will move on to PermTest. I will create a user for Molly. I will create a role, rock and roll, and I will make Molly a member of rock and roll. Next thing I will do, I will create a diagnostic view called token info. And this one returns 3 columns from a DMV called sys.userToken, and the values of these 3 these 3 system functions: original login, system user, and user. And I will discuss a little more detail when we see the output from them, what they actually do. Next thing I will do, I will create a table called perm table, which has an ID, there's a title, and there is an auditing column, which defaults to the current database user. And I will insert one row immediately with the title Strawberry Fields Forever. Next thing I will do, I will create a procedure called TestSP, which accepts a title, an ID and the title. It will start off doing a select from that diagnostic view. It will insert the ID and the title into perm table, and then return all rows in perm table. And I will give rock and roll the permission to run TestSP. And that completes the setup. So remember now, we have a table and we have a stored procedure. We have not granted any permission whatsoever on the table, on the stored procedure. Now what I'm going to do is I will run the TestSP as Molly. Now you may think that, okay, the presenter will now open a second window. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use this command, execute as the user. This is very, very handy if you want to test permissions for a database user. You can just say execute as user, and you don't have to even create a login. You can use a login as user if you want to, one created without login. And then you can run the test, and then you complete the whole thing with revert. Now, syntactically, revert does not have to be in a batch on its own, but always do that, because maybe this batch errors out and then revert is not executed, and you will be very confused thinking, what? I know, because I've been there, done that more than once. I learned this the hard way. So Molly is now going to run TestSP and try to enter fixing a hole. And she did. She entered fixing a hole, although she does not have any permission whatsoever. But because DBO owns both the table and the procedure, there was no permission check at all. And let's now look at the output from token info. So there are 3 rows and are 3 security tokens. There is Molly, the user herself, and the 2 roles she's a member of, public and rock and roll. And we can see the usage. So these roles are good both for grant and a deny. So we can get both permissions and granted or denied through these tokens. And then we can also see the output of original login. That was me. I was the one who actually logged into SQL Server, but I was impersonating Molly as a database user, and also she maps to Molly on server level. So that's the difference. Original login returned the actual login that logged in, whereas system user and DB user returns the currently impersonated user. Okay, so what happens now if I change the ownership of testers P? So I'm going to create a user here called Desmond, who is actually the, as you might know, the husband of Molly. And because I'm only going to do this in the database, I'm not going to create a login. I'm just going to create a Desmond without login. And I'm going to make Desmond the owner of testers P. And because I do change the ownership, I need to re-grant the permission. And now Molly tries to run this, and this time enter come together. But now there are 3 select permissions. She can't access token info, she can't access perm table, and neither do insert nor do select. But because obviously now Desmond owns this procedure, so he could do all sorts of nasty things with perm table that DBO will not agree to. But the key is when DBO owns the procedure, we think that, okay, DBO owns the procedure, so he's entitled to do whatever he wants to do with the perm table. Now, as I said, you may not even think about this because it's very common to have DBO as the owner of everything. So it's so let's go back to that as well and make DBO the owner of testers P. And now Molly again runs this and enters come together and was successfully. Now we're going to make some modifications to this testers P because it's going to try different things. So we're going to add a dynamic part, some dynamic SQL, some bad dynamic SQL, because this one is, you can see, wide open for SQL injection. Now Molly could enter something that starts with a single quote and then some SQL statement, then 2 hyphens at the end to comment out these closing single quotes, and maybe do something naughty. So if permissions, and if she has permissions to do so. So we're going to create that one, and Molly's going to run this and enter this time love me do. And we get an error message. The select permission was denied on the object perm table, database perm test schema DBO. But you can see this comes after the print, the dynamic part, and indeed love me do was inserted. But for this dynamic SQL, no, because that's not part of the procedure testers P. It's a stored procedure of its own, a nameless and ownerless stored procedure. So there is no ownership chaining. Sometimes people complain about why it would be practical if it worked. But think about this for a second. Let's say that ownership chaining had worked here. This means that, well, Molly could say, well, as I said, single quote, delete important table, 2 hyphens, and completely empty that important table because she would have all the permissions that DBO has, assuming that DBO owns the important table. So it's quite a good thing that ownership chaining doesn't work here. Now, the next thing we're going to do here, we're going to add one more parameter called reset. And if that one is 1, that permits the caller to complete the empty perm table with truncate table and start over. And we use the truncate table because we think it's more efficient than just doing a delete. So Molly's going to try to run this and enter Martham ID and clear the table. But we get cannot find the object perm table because it does not exist or you do not have permissions. You see, although truncate logically is a delete statement, it requires the altered permission on the table, which you don't get through ownership chaining. And this one is a little more devilish. So the idea here is that we have some deployment problem. It could be that when the user runs testers P, we have actually not come around to create the perm table yet. And we don't want an ugly error message being splashed in the face of a user. So we will silent it's going to say no table today. And so we create this one, this version. And then Molly tries to enter the fool on the hill. And she sure feels like a fool because it says no table today. And yet Molly knows that, hey, wait a minute, I inserted data into that table just a minute ago. What's going on? Well, what is going on here is that we are making this check on object ID, but that one, no ownership chaining is present here. No, for this to return a value, to return the object ID and perm table, the caller, the actual, or the permission view definition has to be present. Molly needs to have that permission for this to work. And she does not have any permission on perm table at all. View definition or select permission would also work, but she doesn't have any of those permissions, and therefore, yeah, no table today. So we have now seen how ownership chaining works, and when it does not, let's now look at what we can do when ownership chaining doesn't cut it, but we still want to package permissions in store procedures, and that is certificate signing. I would start off giving a recipe, which, yeah, it's going to maybe confuse you a little bit because it's lots of things at once, but I need to start somewhere. So first of all, you create a certificate. You sign the procedure with that certificate. You create a user from that certificate, and then you grant that certificate user the permissions needed. And that could, if that would be the right thing to do, could be membership in a role. Now, as I said, that was quite a bit of a mouthful at once. So let's take this kind of step by step. First of all, certificates and signatures, that is nothing which is unique to SQL Server. No, it's a common technique in IT security. First of all, a certificate, that is an asymmetric key that has three components. There's a private key that you keep secret and protect by a password, locked into a safe or whatever. There is a public key that you can share with anyone on your website or whatever. It's nothing secret about it at all. And there is also some metadata, including a signature on the certificate itself. Now, for our purposes, we don't need any certificates from a trusted authority, etc., etc. We can use a self-signed certificate, and we don't really have to care about that metadata, but it is there. Now, so what is the idea of all this? Well, let's say this: you need to send a document or an email, or whatever, to someone, and you want the receiver to be sure that that document is actually authentic. So you sign that with your private key. Now, the receiver then can use your public key and verify the signature. And if the verification of the signature comes out okay, the receiver knows this, the document is from you, and it has not been altered or tampered with in transport. So it's a way of ensuring trust in some piece of information. Now let's go back to SQL Server and see what is the meaning here. So if you call a store procedure that has been signed with a certificate, the first thing SQL Server will do is to check, is the signature valid? If the signature is not valid, there will not be an error. SQL Server will simply just ignore it. But if the signature is valid, well, then user will see, as SQL Server will see, is there a user tied to this certificate? And if there is, SQL Server will add that user to sys.user token. And therefore, the permissions of that user will apply inside the procedure. We're going to see this in effect quite soon, but just a few things about this user. That's a very specific kind of user. You cannot log in as this user, nor can it be impersonated. You could say it's kind of a kludge, but they didn't really want grant permissions to certificates, so they put in the user as a bridge between the certificate and the permission. And also, you can only create one user per certificate because nothing else would make sense. So let's have a look at this. And we're going to move to perm test. I'm going to start with creating a certificate called DMAcert, and I need to have a means to protect it. And you can create the normal or common way is to protect a certificate with the database master key, but we're going to use a password. And this time the password is all you need is love. And also the syntax requires us to give a subject, which is that metadata. And normally that subject has some structure, but we can only put in a string with free text as long as we close that one in double quotes. In this case, it only tells you this is a signature to demonstrate procedure signing. So then I'm going to sign the private procedure, and because I'm going to use my private key, I need to give the password to access the private key. Add signature to TestSP by certificate DMAcert with password. All you need is love. Now, before we move on, let's have a look at how we can see which procedures in the database that are signed. And there is a catalog view called sys.crypt_properties, which holds this information. And we join that to sys certificates on the thumbprint. A thumbprint is a 32-byte sequence which uniquely, globally identifies the certificates. And we also join to sys objects and sys schemas to get the name of the procedure. So we can get this data here. We can see that TestSP has been signed by DMAcert. And out to the right here, we can see the signature itself, crypt property, but yeah, it's a blob, so it's not particularly interesting to look at. Anyway, we can move on now. I'm now going to create that user, and it's a special syntax. We say create user, DMAcert user from certificate DMAcert. So let's do that. And just to show you that if I try to create a second one, I get an error message. Now, let's have a look at this guy in sys database principles. And we can see that here, it's type C, a certificate mapped user, and authentication type desk, none. So it cannot log in. Okay, the last thing we're going to do is going to grant some permissions, and for the test we're going to grant this guy select permission on perm table. And now let's go back to our test SP, and this is how it looked like the last time we played with it. It has this check on perm table. So it's going to print out no table today if the tables cannot be found, else it's going to insert a row. And Molly ran this, and she got the message, no table today. But she's going to make a new attempt, and now this time she's going to try with across the universe. And lo and behold, this time, yes, she was able to insert across the universe. But let's look here now in the token. We have one more token here, demoassert user map to certificate, grant or deny. And because this user has select permission on perm table, the call to object ID works out. So that's why the whole thing's working out. We have packaged that permission into the procedure. Now, we got some complaints from users. Yeah, it was good you put in that check, but that message was a little cryptic. No table today. And yeah, okay, so we're going to change that to, well, perm table has not been created yet. And then Molly is now going to try this to enter here comes the sun. But before I do this, just think for yourself a few seconds. Do you think this is going to work out or not? So I'm going to select this and yeah. No, it did not work out. It says perm table has not been created yet. And you can see the certificate user is the demoassert user is no longer available here. And it's quite natural because, as I said, when SQL Server starts the procedure, it checks, is the signature valid? But we have changed the contents. So the signature is bound to the content, and because we have tampered with the contents, the signature is no longer valid. As a matter of fact, SQL Server takes this one step further. So if we run this query again, there are no rows. So SQL Server realizes, well, okay, we just waste this signature away. It's of no use anymore. So yes, we need to sign the procedure again. Add signature to test SP by certificate demoassert with password. All you need is love. And now Molly is going to again enter, here comes the sun, or tries to enter it. And this time it works out, and demoassert user is back up here. Now let's try this with the dynamic SQL. Will the certificate help here or not? Well, let's try this. So we're going to create that version again, sign it, and Molly is now going to run this to enter taxman. And yes, it did. So although I did not put in the dynamic SQL the select on token info, we can tell from the effect that yes, when we came into this dynamic SQL, demoassert user was still present in sys user token, and therefore the dynamic SQL worked. Now, as I said, this one is open for SQL injection. But think about this. Because we only granted select on perm table, the only thing Molly can do to exploit this is to retrieve data from perm table she is not entitled to see. Of course, that can be bad enough. Let's say it's in the employees table. That can still be bad enough, but at least we have minimized the damage of the SQL injection hole. Because, you know, we shouldn't write code like this, but every once in a while you have a junior programmer that coming in and yeah, you have that hole. So what we're going to do now is we're going to test further how that, when we enter other modules, how that demoassert user remains as his user token. So we're going to create a trigger, and all it's going to do is going to return the name of the trigger and the information in token info. And same thing for a nested procedure. And we're going to create a new version that, well, does the select from token info. It calls a system procedure on perm table or SP help index, and it calls the init procedure and it also inserts a row so that will fire the trigger. And before we sign it, Molly is going to run this to try to enter revolution number 9 so we can see what the effect is of calling SP help index. And you can see SP help index says, no, we don't have this object. No, forget about it, because there is no select permission present. There is no ownership chaining here. But nevertheless, yes, revolution number 9 was inserted. And we still have, you can see here, 3 rows. But let's now sign it. And Malta is then going to run it to enter helter skelter. The first thing we can note, there was no error message, but we actually get the output from SP help index. So this means that when we entered SP help index, demoassert user was still present in sys user token. But now for the interesting part, in RESP, I only have 3 rows. The trigger, I only have 3 rows. So when I enter these modules that are user written, which I have control over, the token was removed, but the token remains for the dynamic SQL and the system procedure that I cannot assign. I think this is a very, very clever design, because let's say that InResP is making some, well, explicit permission check or whatever, that does the user really have this permission? And the calling procedure will have been assigned, and that daemon search user suddenly appears, and the InResP will be tripped and do the wrong thing from what it was intended to do. So if I want the certificate to apply here, I need to sign this one as well. We're going to drop the trigger, and we're going to look at one more thing. You know, Molly has been quite a naughty girl. She's been messy, trying to do all sorts of messing around with perm tables. So, yeah, we better going to deny all permissions on that table to just keep that naughty girl out. And now she's going to try to enter the long and winding road. And again, we get an error from SP help index. But you can see here the daemon search user is still there. But when we enter that now, we enter SP help index. There is a grant, but there is now a deny. And deny always takes precedence over grant. So therefore, Molly did not have the permission. The certificate didn't help here. But look down here, the longer winding road was inserted, because for that part of the main store procedure, there was no permission check at all. So the deny did not have any effect. Now, deny is something you should use very, very sparingly, because you can often shoot yourself in the foot with it. So, because the starting point is that user do not have any permissions at all. So we're going to revoke that before we go back to the slides. So to summarize what we have seen, yes, you need to sign the procedure after each change. And you may be thinking, this is not going to work out. Don't worry, we're going to look at this just in a second, how we're going to manage this. And again, the token and therefore the permissions of the certificate users are carried on into the dynamic SQL and system procedures, but not into nested procedures, triggers, or functions. That is user written code, where we have the choice whether to sign it or not. And deny always trump grant. So that's the one thing you cannot help fix with certificates. Now, as I said, this might seem, how are we going to manage all this? Well, I got a procedure for it. Because of course, you can automate all of this. So I got this procedure called grant perms to SP. And what it does, it performs this recipe. So first of all, what are the parameters? You give the name of the procedures and a table value parameters with the permissions you want to package inside that procedure. And then the procedure will create a certificate with a name formed from this procedure. So you can easily see that, okay, I got this certificate because of this procedure. And the password is a random grid, because as you were going to see, we don't really need to memorize, keep that password. You're only going to use it once. And the subject is the permissions to be granted. So also, when we look at the certificate and certificates, we can see, okay, those are the permissions we package here. And then it's going to sign the procedure with the certificate. It's going to create a user from the certificate, and again with a name form from the procedure. And then it's going to grant the certificate user the permissions inside that TVP. And if we rerun the procedure, it's going to drop everything, user and certificates, and start over. So that's why we don't need to keep that password, because we're only going to use it once. So here's an example call. So I first have to declare my table value parameter, and I have a table type. I'm going to insert, in this case, select on perm table, and then I call it the name of the procedure, the TVP, and there's a third parameter, a debug parameter, so which you can use to see the generated commands. And I very much recommend when you use these the first couple of times to do that so you understand what is going on. And I would suggest this, that in many times you're going to put a call like this in your deployment script. So you have, well, create procedure, go, and then you have this at the end. Presuming, of course, that you entrust your developers to do this. If you have junior developers, well, of course, you can add these separately. And then, of course, you have to make sure that they don't have the permissions to do this. And now I like to stress one important principle that I'm not going to talk a whole lot about, but it's very important, is that you identify the minimum permissions you want to package. Because, yes, you can always get away with saying, well, DB owner here, that's going to work. Because it's, or if you're going to mention a role here, it's going to put that certificate user into that role. If you then have an SQL injection help, it appears later because someone, a junior programmer goes in and creates that hole. You have a wide open thing, but if you minimize the permissions, then you minimize the damage of any SQL injection hole. It's always a great principle in compute or all kinds of security. Never grant more permissions than necessary. So let's have a look at this. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change this test.sp to have that be that reset version. And then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to create a schema. I didn't show that on the main slide, but as a matter of fact, I've put this one in a side schema because I'm thinking it's quite practical to grant all users execute permissions on the DBO schema, so you don't have to grant permissions for every step procedures. But you don't want users to be able to run this procedure, not that they would even be able to do something with it because it requires permissions, but nevertheless, so I like to put this one aside. And then I'm going to create the table type in that schema. And then I have the procedure with the parameters, the name, the permissions, and the debug flag. Now, I will not go through this procedure because this is made in exercise in writing dynamic SQL. So very good dynamic SQL, I like to say, but it's not, that is not the topic for this session. But I very much encourage you to have a look at this code later on your own. So I'm just going to create it, and we're only going to look at it in action. So we have this procedure, and we need, I think we need delete permissions to get away with that truncated table. We have to delete that data, wasn't it? So we can now see the commands. We can see here, create certificate test.sp $cert. So that's the name the way I formed the name. And that dollar character, in case you wonder, it doesn't mean anything special to TSQL. It's just a permitted character in identifier. And let's use that to make it easy to read the name. Encryption my password, and there's a grid with one extra character to make sure that absolutely sure I'm past the complexity checks in Windows. With the subject, so you can see here, grant, delete, and perm table, and you're going to see that in sys certificates. Add signature to DBO, test.sp, buy a certificate, test.sp $cert with password, and that is the grid. I'm going to create the user, test.sp $cert user, from certificate, test.sp $cert, and grant, delete, and perm table. And then Molly's going to try to run this and enter paperback writer. She's also going to try to reset the table. Wait a minute. Cannot find the, oh, yeah, stupid me. Of course, we need alter permissions on the table. Oh, yeah. Sorry about that, folks. Well, okay, so I did this on purpose because now you can see I rerun the procedure and it starts off drop signature from test.sp by certificate, drop user test.sp cert user, drop certificate test.sp $cert, and then it creates a new certificate called test.sp $cert. It's a new certificate because it will have a different thumbprint, so it's not the same certificate. The thumbprint identifies the certificate, not the name. So now Molly is then going to try this and enter paperback writer. And indeed, she did clear the table, and there's only one row there now. And test.sp $cert user, you can see this one contributes with the alter permission. So, yeah, I don't think there's any sessions questions. But if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and Solo will forward them to me. So let's move on to look at this at server level. And we're going to start with looking at a scenario. So let's say this, you're a DBA, and there's lots of applications on this instance. You're the DBA for. And for each database, there are power users that have DBA owner permissions, but they do not have any server level permissions, nor should they have. However, these users have a legit need to see which users are connected to their database. So for example, if they see no one is connected right now, okay, I can do some database maintenance. But to see which users are connected, you need, from sysdmexec sessions, you need view server state. But that permission would permit them to see just too much. I mean, imagine, for example, that this is a hosting service. Of course, they should only see users in their own database, not users from other customers. That would be really, really bad. Now, certificates to the rescue. Now, and we're going to start to look at this, and we're going to put the procedure in the master database. And in this case, the recipe is very, very similar to when we did it in the database. So we're going to create a certificate in master, sign the procedure with a certificate. Then we're going to create a login from that certificate and grant the login the required permissions. Because when we work with server level permissions, we grant those to logins, server principals, not database users. And while it's called a login, yeah, it cannot really log in, but it just only exists to connect permissions and certificates. And there is a syslogin token where we can inspect the tokens. So let's have a look at this. And so we're going to move to the master database. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to create a role called server role called super users for all these admins that are power users in the databases. And we're going to create a super user for perm test called Mr. Kite with the password of benefit. And we're going to make Mr. Kite a member of super users. Then we're going to create a login token info. This is the same thing as before, except now we're getting the tokens from syslogin token. And then we're going to create a procedure called SPShowUsers in DB. And we're going to put this one in master. And because it starts with SP underscore and exists in masters, it can be invoked from any database by only that name. And then it will execute in the context of that database. Yes, this is your own system procedure. But beware, this is undocumented, this is unsupported, and it could break in any release. Particularly, Microsoft could decide to implement their own SPShowUsers in DB, which would take procedures over this one. Then anyway, we're going to start returning the information from login token info, and then we're going to perform a permission check. Is the user a member of super users, or does at least the user have control server? That is a sysadmin more or less. And if that is the case, we're going to run this query from sysdmx accessions and filter by the ID for the current database. Else, we're going to raise an error message. Now, you may be thinking here, so why have the permission check inside the procedure? Why not just simply only grant permissions to the super users? Well, the super users, they are a server role. They are a server principal. But when you grant permissions to store procedures, you grant those to database principals, to database users. So if you want to do that, you will have to add these people as users in master. Do you like adding users in master? I don't. So there is only really one choice, and that is public. So we're going to give everyone the right to run that procedure. That's why we have the permission check there. So anyway, I'm going to move to perm test. I'm going to run this as myself first. And you can see, first of all, so you can see my tokens. I got lots of tokens. I love tokens. I collect tokens. And more precisely, if you're a Windows login, you get a lot more tokens than if you're a SQL login, because of all the Windows groups you're a member of. Anyway, we can see it returns 4 rows. But if you look in my tab strip, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this one that I got when I opened in Management Studio is in temp to be. So that's why that one is not shown. Okay. Now I'm going to try this as Mr. Kite, and I'm first going to add Mr. Kite as a user in this database, and I'm going to make him a DB owner because, well, he's a super user for perm test. And now I'm going to have Mr. Kite to run this procedure. Now I have to use a new command. I need to use execute as a login. Execute as user is great when you work in the database, and particularly if you have a login this user. But if you have a user which you know has a login, it's always good to use execute as login because there are some restrictions with execute as user, as we're going to see later. But anyway, Mr. Kite runs this, but he only sees his own session because when you don't have use server state, you're only going to see the current session you're running. Even if you're logged in other windows, you're only going to see the current session. And we can also see the tokens. There are 3 of them. Mr. Kite, that's the SQL login, and he's a member of public and super users. And you can also see here on the login on system server level in Mr. Kite, and for some reason it's guest in the database. It should be oh no, not DBO, but I don't know why it says guest, but it doesn't matter. So anyway, now we're going to use certificate signing here, and I'm going to move to master. I'm going to create a certificate called Demo Server Cert, and the password will be while my guitar gently weeps, and the subject for signing on the procedure SPShowUsers in DB. And then I'm going to sign the procedure, add signature to SPShowUsers in DB by certificate Demo Server Cert with password while my guitar gently weeps. And then I'm going to create a login. Again, create login from certificate Demo Server Cert, and if I try to create a second one, oops, I get an error message. I can only create one of them. And then I'm going to have a look at this login. And we're going to put that on the top. And you can see at certificate map login, there is no authentication type desk here, but you will have to believe me, there's no way you can log in as Demo Server Cert login. Anyway, we're then going to grant view server state Demo Server Cert login. And Mr. Kite now is going to try to run this. And bingo, he sees all the sessions connected to perm test. And we can see how among the tokens, we have 2 new rows. We have Demo Server Cert login and also Demo Server Cert, the certificate. Why this one appears here, does not appear in the certificate, does not appear in sysuser token, I don't know. And it probably doesn't matter. This is the important one because this is the one that contributes with view server state and makes the whole thing possible. Now, this was when we have the procedure in the master database. Now, let's say we want to do this in a procedure in the user database. This makes the recipe a little more complicated. We need 2 more steps. So the first step is we're going to create the certificate in the user database and sign the procedure. Then we're going to drop the private key. Why? Well, let's say that we're going to do this and the super user is eavesdropping over our shoulders and thinking, I'm going to use that password. But once we have dropped the private key, the certificate is no longer good for procedure signing. It's only good for validating the signature. So that's a security measure. Then we're going to copy the certificate, that is the public key, to the master database, and then we're going to create the login and grant the login the required permissions. So let's have a look at this. So we're going to move to perm test, and I'm going to create that login token info in perm test as well, just to have it handy. And then I'm going to create here a procedure called show sessions. So, you know, we had to open a support case with CSS, and they found out about our special users in DB, and they told us in no uncertain terms, wait a minute, guys, that's unsupported, undocumented. Don't do that. So, okay, yeah, we're going to create this procedure in every database then. But we're going to keep the permission check. We don't want Mr. Kite to grant Molly the permissions to run this procedure. No. We still want to make sure that it's only the super users or sysadmin folks that can run this one. So we're keeping that permission check. So now Mr. Kite is going to run show sessions, but because we haven't signed it, he only sees the current session. So now let's going to do and take care of this. We're going to create the certificate demo server cert 2, and remember we are still in perm test, and the password is tomorrow never knows. And we're going to sign the procedure, add signature to show sessions by certificate demo server cert 2 with the password tomorrow never knows. And Mr. Kite is seeing this and thinking, yeah, tomorrow never knows. You don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. No, you're not going to do that, because we said, oops, sorry about that, folks. We said author certificate demo server cert 2 remove private key, and from now the certificate is only good for validating the signature. So now we're going to move it to master, and so this is the idea. We can retrieve the public key with the function cert encoded, which accepts the ID for the certificate, which we can retrieve with the function cert ID. Demo server cert 2, and we're going to move to master, and then we can say create certificate demo server cert 2 from binary and give the actual key. So that's great. We're going to run this, and let's see here, and oh, incorrect syntax near public key. Yes, yeah, you can't use a variable here. You have to use the actual, you have to type in the key, more or less. Don't ask me why they not support a variable. The only good excuse I can think of is that they were very, very short on time, so they did not come around to it. So anyway, we have to build an SQL statement where we said create certificate demo server cert 2 from binary, convert the varchar using style 1 to get a hex string that starts with 0x. And we're going to print out the command. Oops, sorry, print out the command, move to master and run it in master. And this was, well, fantastic command we ran. So now we are also in master now. We're going to create the login, demo server cert 2 login from certificate demo server cert 2, and we're going to grant that login view server state. And then we're going to move back to perm test, and Mr. Kite is going to try this. And bingo, he sees now all the sessions connected to perm test, and we can see a demo server cert 2 login and demo server cert 2. Now this script goes on with a second way to do this, because this command here, create from binary, was introduced in SQL 2012. So if you still are in 2005 or 2008, you will have to use a different command. That's what I do with the rest of the script, but I'm not going to spend any time on that. And if you have those servers, by all means, upgrade. So, of course, we have done this now by running each command at once, but of course we should automate this. And I have a script to do this. Yes, it is a script, not a procedure. The reason I'm thinking this that, well, you might need to run this script on, well, that server there up to the left on Monday, the one there in the middle on Wednesday, and that one down there to the right on Friday. So it's more easy to just have it on disk, open it in Management Studio on the database where you want to run it. But if you want to make this as a procedure or PowerShell script, just be my guest. Be my guest. Just you feel free to do that. It's included in the download material. So anyway, you need to specify the database, the procedure, and the permissions. And the script will then create a certificate in the user database, sign the procedure, and drop the private key. It will copy the certificate to master, and then create a login from the certificate and grants the permission. Now there's one more thing. Let's say that the database is in availability group. Then we need this thing on master in all master databases where the AG, for all those in the AG. So the script takes care of this. So it's going to set up temporary linked server for each node in the AG and copy the certificate and login and permissions to all nodes in the AG. So let's have a look at this script a little bit. And we can see here the name of the database, perm test, the name of the procedure, and the permissions. Again, it's a table value, and also debug flags. We can see the output. The rest of the script, which you have below the end of the setup, is just again a lot of dynamic SQL that I encourage you to have a look at, but I'm not going to go through it because that would take too much time and not give that much. We're only going to run and look at the output. So first of all, I print out for every dynamic SQL, I print out the database where I'm working, and every command I run in perm test, or more precisely the database, have to be dynamic SQL because the database name is dynamic. So I'm starting, let's see, is the procedure signed, and then I'm going to drop the certificate, and you can see here the name, the style I'm making the names is completely different from the other script. There are two reasons for that. One reason is that I actually wrote those two things several years apart, but also because it's quite good having different styles so they don't go in clash with each other. I'm then also going to make sure if there's a use, I'm going to drop that one, and then I'm going to create the certificate and all this and copy it to master, create it, and so you can see I'm now doing things in master and also do the signing. I don't have an AG here, so you will not see those parts. You will have to try that on your own. And if I rerun this, you can see how I'm going to start in master and drop the login and so on. Now, before we move on to the next thing, I like to talk about the beauty about the whole thing. So let's say you are the server level DBA. You can request, and you have these power users, then you can request to review the code before you're signing and giving your blessing to add these extra permissions. Make sure, yep, this is what we agreed on. You're not overstepping the boundaries. Good. Now, the power user may then come back to his desk and think, yeah, I'm going to do all sorts of nasty things here. Yeah, I can do that, but and change the procedure. But that means the code will change, the signature and the permissions will disappear. And he will have to come back to you. And you can sign it again. Wait a minute. No. I do not agree with that. Or, yeah, okay, this good change is good. So you have full control. They can't go and elevate the permissions behind your back. And one more thing, what you see is what you sign. So if let's say that the procedure you get is calling another procedure or is inserting rows into tables, but you don't have to worry about what the other procedures are doing or if there are any triggers, because you know the certificate login will go away when you enter these modules. So you only have to look at the code in front of you. This is also a very, very great thing, and that's why that's such a great feature that they do that. You only have to worry about, well, dynamic SQL, of course. So yeah, if they're reading dynamic SQL from a table, wait a minute, don't agree to that. That would be a bad thing. So let's now move on to look at the other way to do this. Execute as and start to look at this at database permissions. And as I said, some people might like this better. Well, yeah. Anyway, so here's the proper version to do this. You first create a proxy user without login and with a name derived from this procedure. Then you grant the proxy user the required permissions, and then you add this clause with execute as sp_name.proxy to the procedure. And all of this will be in the same file as the procedure. This case, because you have this as part of the procedure, you will have to create the user and this stuff on the top of the procedure file. There's also a lazy version. And that is just, you don't care about permissions. You only say with executors own them and no proxy user. And so as long as DBO owns the procedure, that means, well, execute as DBO. Well, let's have a look at this. So we're going to move to perm test. We're going to create a new procedure, well, a new. It's a new name, but it's the same contents as before. And we're going to include that with the dynamic part. It's called testproc, and rock and roll will get the permission to run testproc. And as a repeat, what happens now when Molly runs this version of testproc and it tries to enter Norwegian wood? Well, she gets this error message. The select permission was denied on a big perm table because in the dynamic part, but Norwegian wood was inserted. So let's now fix this with execute as. We're going to create this user called testproc.proxy without login and grant select to that user on perm table to testproc.proxy. And then we're going to change the procedure to have this line here with execute as testproc.proxy. And then it's the same as before. We're going to run this. And Molly is now going to run this again and try to enter back in the USSR. And things have changed. Molly did not enter testproc back in the USSR. It says that testproc.proxy entered back in the USSR. And if we look at the tokens, we only see two, test_proc.proxy and public. And if we look here, we can still see me because I was the one who logged in. We only see a SID here because this was a login as user, but there's test_proc.proxy. No sign whatsoever of Molly. So this is different. This is impersonation. We're not just adding a token. No, we are John Malkovich. So let's have a look at more. We're going to add that trigger again and see how this extends when we call other things here. And we're going to create that version again with SP help index. And Molly is going to run that version. And this time she's going to enter drive my car. And we can first of all see, yes, it worked. The impersonation was still active when we entered SP help index. And we can see here we have the tokens and yes, drive my car. But look here now, InResP, still test_proc.proxy. The perm table, still test_proc.proxy. It does not bounce back to Molly. So this can have quite some consequences. Imagine here that insert SP, sorry, InResP is doing some, well, role level security based on system user and or user, which is very common to use, and will return no rows back at all. And perm table here, well, perm table might do some auditing using system user and be auditing to the wrong user. That's not really good. That can have some bad consequences. And anyway, here's the later version. We're going to do that reset version. So test_proc2 with execute as owner. And Molly is now going to try to run this to enter. I need to go on to execution as well. And Molly is going to enter now, run this and enter with a little help from my friends. And indeed, with a little help from a friend, DBO, she was again able to clear the table. Look here, the tokens. DBO, public DB owner. Look, system user, SA. Yes, because SA owns this database. So now let's go back to look at this one again. Let's say we had execute as owner here. Well, and we had this, let's say, row level security, which is maybe set up so that DBO can see everything. Oh, big security hole because someone else called this procedure with this execute as. Or imagine this SQL injection hole. Let's say that someone else puts in sloppily execute as owner. Now, Molly can go and inject, well, single quote, drop, important table, 2 hyphens, because he can do anything in the database that DBO can do if we have this injection hole. That's not good at all. We can actually, if you want to see which procedure has an execute as clause, this is very simple. You can see this in SQL modules, and there is this column execute as principal ID, which is a username unless it's -2, which stands for owner. So we can run this. And we can see that test_proc2 has execute as owner and test_proc has test_proc.proxy. Let's go back to the slides. So we have seen now, yes, this is absolutely a lot simpler than certificates. Just put it on and it works. But the later version breaks the principle of granting minimum permissions. That's bad enough in my book. Also, it breaks the scheme for row level security and auditing that it's based on system user, etc., or session user, sys username, and all of those guys. But this is not a complete roadblock because you can still use original login or you can use session context. So there's no problem with that. You can work around that. But it requires that you plan ahead. So much for this thing being simpler. This is kind of scary because you might, oh, this is so simple, I can use this. And then afterwards you realize, oh, that was a problem. And now you might be listening to this, wait a minute, we use system user all over the place. Oh, what if some of our developers get the idea to use this? Okay, I got a DDL trigger to stop this madness. I'm not going to show it to you, but you can get this in the download material. It's going to say, oh no, execute as is not permitted in this database and raise an error. So it's a way of keeping that out. But let's now say that, no, you still think, no, it's not a problem for us. We're using already a login or context info now, and this is just so simple. I want to use this on server level as well. I mean, you're thinking saying to yourself, I could create a proxy login, disable that one, grant permissions, add execute as clause. It's going to work. It's a lot more simpler than those certificates. That's just so complicated. Well, let's have a look at this. So we're going to move to master. We're going to create a login called show sessions to $proxy with the password of magical mystery tool, and we're going to disable that login and grant it view server state. And I'm going to move to perm test, going to create a user for that show sessions to $proxy, and they're going to create a procedure called show sessions to with execute as show sessions to $proxy. And I'm going to start with the select from login token info, and then I'm going to do that permission check. But wait a minute, I've got impersonating show sessions $2 proxy, who's not a member of super users. I want to know if the caller is a member of super users. So I can do that by saying execute as caller and then reverting back to this context. So yeah, so much for this thing being simpler. But anyway, we're going to do that. And we're going to move on, and we're going to actually try to run this as ourselves. So this should work out. Yes, this, but we only see the current sessions. Why? Well, here we have show sessions $2.proxy, public, and deny only. All of a sudden, these tokens are only good for deny. Why? Well, when you say execute as in the procedure, that is the same thing as execute as user. That is, you're impersonating a database user. And as a general concept in security, when you do impersonation, that is only valid in the context where you do the impersonation, not outside of it. So if you impersonate a database user, you are sandboxed. That one is not trusted on server level. So you're sandboxed into the current database, and you cannot make any access outside of it. However, there are two doors that can be open. One to take you out of the sandbox and one where you want to go to avoid this. The first one is to make the database trustworthy. That opens the door out from the database. And to go where you want to go, in this case, the server level, you need the permission authenticate server, or rather the database owner. The database owner should have been granted this permission. And you might recall that SA owns perm tests. So that door is already open. We only need to make the database trustworthy. Okay, let's try that. So we're going to do this, auth the database, set perm test, set trustworthy on. And then we're going to do perm test. No, wait a minute, I got to run to 1830. That's good. I'm quite good on time. Sorry about that. So anyway, I'm going to move. I'm going to run this as myself. Yes, I see all the sessions now. And I got one more token there, SA as authenticator. And you can say that SA now has been authenticated to vouch for this guy, and therefore we can raise their level to grant or deny. And Mr. Kite also tries this. Yep, it works for him. I know you're saying to yourself, oh, yeah, this is just so much easier. This is just so much trustworthy is a security risk. First, remember this, when we use certificates, that gives you the possibility to review the code every time the power user changes the procedure with server level access. But if you go with execute as and trustworthy, well, then you're given the power user the carte blanche to change the procedure to just do whatever they like. For example, remove that filter on database ID. So that's kind of bad thing. You lose the control. But that's only the start of it. Red alert. Red alert. And for this script, I will not, excuse me just for a second. I'm going to bring some more light into my room. And so when I started the session, it was still sunshine outside, and now it's getting close to sunset. So anyway, I'm going to log in as Mr. Kite. So I'm not going to do this execute as just to make it more convincing. So, and I'm going to run this Mr. Kite, and I'm going to run this login token info, and also make a check, am I sysadmin? Or no, Mr. Kite is not sysadmin, and we can see the token, Mr. Kite, public super users. And original login is now Mr. Kite because he was actually Mr. Kite that logged in. System user and DB user. Okay. But look here now. He's going to say execute as user DBO, impersonate DBO. And Mr. Kite is sysadmin and is taking over the server. Not good. You can see here, SA, public, sysadmin, SA is the authenticator, and system user reports SA, DB user reports DBO. So any auditing that is done on system user or DB user, well, will give the blame to SA. Only if auditing is done on original login, Mr. Kite will be revealed for doing nasty things. But that's the only one. And I'm sure like some good people are out there using original login, but there's just so many places where people rely on system user because it's been around for such a long time. And just to show you, it's not a joke, I'm going to try run this configure, which requires sysadmin. Yep, I could do that, or Mr. Kite could do that. So let's try to change this. So I'm going to log in as myself again. And I said before that it's not best practice to have SA to own a database. No, I think each database should be owned by an SQL login that exists solely to own that database and which have not been granted any permissions whatsoever. So I'm going to create such a login called permtest.owner. I'm going to give it a random password, so I don't even know it myself. And I'm also going to disable it just to get as much security I want. And then I'm going to say authorization on database ::permtest to permtest.owner. And I'm going to log back in again as Mr. Kite. And it's going to try that DBO stunt again. And he's not sysadmin. That's good. However, when you run show sessions 2, there is a snag because it only now sees the current sessions. And we can see now we have deny only. Permtest.owner appears as authenticator, but has not been entrusted to vouch for these guys. So that's why we have deny only. Okay, but then we could grant that permtest.owner the permission authenticate server. I said we should not do that. It should be an owner without permissions, but let's just test it and see how it works out. So I'm going to move back to master, that's myself, and say grant authenticate server to permtest.owner. And I'm going to move back here again, that's Mr. Kite. And Mr. Kite is now going to run show sessions. And indeed, yep, he sees all the sessions connected to permtest. Great. And he tries to play DBO. And no, he's not sysadmin. It seems that we have tightened that hole. That's really great. We can feel quite, but wait a minute, what is going on now? Mr. Kite is creating a user for me in this database. What? And then he's impersonating me. What? Oh, yes. Yep, that's the story. You can't have the cake and eat it. So yes, if you combine trustworthy with authenticate server, a person who's DB owner, or rather who have rights to create and impersonate users in the database, can elevate to sysadmin. And I'd like to dwell on this a little bit for a second. You might think, yeah, but it's no problem downside because I trust these people are power users. They will never do anything evil because I'm very good friends with them. Yes, but then for some reason you're not entrusting them to be sysadmin. Because maybe, okay, Bill he's a great guy. He would never do anything, go rogue and steal data. But maybe then Bill one day needs something, maybe a new login or whatever that requires sysadmin. And you're in the meeting and he knows about this. So he's going to do this. And thinks, oh, the DBA will be happy because I'm just going to do his job. But he messes up and then you have to spend the full weekend to repair after Bill. That's also one thing to think about because this is just so easy to abuse. So this was my recommendation. The owner of each database should be a unique SQL login which exists solely to own that database and no permissions granted whatsoever. Because if someone tells you, you need to make that database trustworthy and you have lots of things on your desk, so you just, okay, that's because trustworthy sounds so innocent. But if someone then says, oh, you need to grant that permission, wait a minute, wait, permission, that's just kind of, I like to believe that's a knee-jerk reaction that you need to leak on a thing twice. Do I really want to do this? So that's why I think this is I think which is a great idea to having a non-sysadmin user to own the database. Now, all this said, lots of databases out there where everyone who has any kind of elevated permissions already are sysadmin because there is no local power users. There are only sysadmin. The server level DBA is also the database DBA. And of course, in that case, it's quite okay to open both the doors and make the database trustworthy because there is no one who can elevate the permissions. But you should really be sure that this is always going to be the case, never will change. You might take in a consultant and think, oh, okay, we're going to make him DB owner so he can change procedures and indexes and all that sort of stuff. And then, well, maybe you use server state and all the trace, but you don't want him, of course, that consultant to be able to add users and so on. I can tell you, I've got exactly that situation at the client. No, I did not abuse it, but yes, I know the database was trustworthy and it was just one step away. So be careful. That's why I don't like trustworthy at all. Now, very, very quickly, let's discuss about cross-database access. So we have a database A, and in A, you have a procedure P that accesses table T in the database B. Now, by default, there is no ownership chaining across databases. So if you do nothing at all, that will be a permission error. Now, how to deal with this? So, and what is the best solution here depends on the situation. That is not really just always do this, because the reason why you do cross-database access, there can be more than one. So some cases, you just raise the white flag. Okay, I'm going to add the users to B and grant them permissions on T and be done with it. And sometimes this is okay, but far from always. You can enable cross-database ownership chaining for both databases. You can even enable it on server level, but don't do that. And if you do this, well, and this case presumes that the databases have the same owner. You still need to add the users to B to do this, but there's one small problem with this. The same security problem as trustworthy. Someone with enough permissions in the database can elevate to sysadmin. It's more complicated to abuse than trustworthy, but at least for a rogue user who really wants to take over the server, it's not going to be stopped by it. Maybe it's going to stop that Bill who want to be helpful, but then again, I remember a session I watched it pass a couple of years ago where, well, maybe that guy did do this trick, but he did quite a few things only to get his job done. So he sneaked in to get extra permissions. So yes. Now, certificate signing, that I would say this is a perfect situation where you only have occasional calls between different applications. Let's say the payroll database needs to call the HR database in 2 places. Then here's a very quick recipe for do this. You create the certificate in B, create the user and grant the permissions on T, copy the certificate to A and sign P. Or maybe it's slightly different order. I don't have a script for this, but you can do this, work from the other scripts that I have if you need this. Now, the great thing with this is you don't need to add the users to B because the permission to access B also comes with a certificate. But while I think certificates is a great solution, if you have a multi-database applications with that's just about every procedure makes a cross-database access, it gets out of hand a little bit. And for that case, yes, execute as trustworthy could be a better choice than cross-database ownership chaining, if done right. So first of all, the database owner should be owned. The database should be owned by the same SQL login that has absolutely no server level permissions. But because the databases are part of the same applications, yes, it does make sense to have the same owner for all of them. Also, the same set of people must be DB owner in all databases. So if the application is designed to use multiple databases to have them as security boundaries, no, this is not then going to work out because then people can use this to get access to the other databases. So if that doesn't work out, well, then certificates is the way to go. And I cover this in my article in a lot more detail than I did here. This was just very briefly to have it covered. So here's a quick summary of what I've been talking about. So ownership chaining, that is what you use 95% of the time for plain and simple DML and procedures, and probably without thinking of it because you've done this from the first day you started using SQL Server. But it does not work with dynamic SQL. It does not work with advanced permissions such as auto. It does not work with metadata access. It does not work for server level permissions, and it is disabled by default for cross-database access. Then we have certificate signing. Well, permits you to package about any database or server level permission in its procedure in a very fine-grained way. But you cannot overcome an explicit deny. And would it be permissions in the Windows file system? No, that's not going to work out because, of course, permissions inside SQL Server is never going to work in Windows, of course. And it's very easy to manage with grant perms to SP and the script for server level permissions, which are included in the download material. So it's very easy to automate. And I say this is the preferred method for database permissions, and always use certificates when you need this on server level for server level permissions. Then we have execute as. Well, it's good for the lazy and casual. I can't deny that. But it has implications for auditing and row level security that requires you to plan ahead to be able to use this. But I can't say I like execute as, but for database permissions, yeah, well, it can be okay if conditions are relaxed or if there is a deny you need to overcome. But for server level permissions, please always use certificate signing because this trustworthy thing, I don't really like it. Oh, it's getting very near the end. My name is Erland Sommarskog. My email address, I think that's when it's in the chat as well, is sql@sommarskog.se, and my slides and scripts are available on my website, sommarskog.se/present. And the article itself, I think Solar has dropped the link to the main article in the chat as well. So it's sommarskog.se grant perm HTML. And there is also an appendix which covers specific applications. For example, if you have an activation procedure with a service broker, which I did not touch at all, which is a little more complicated. There's also an example if you want to use these to start jobs or some interesting things with linked service. So but all I'll be talking about today is this one. So yes, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, very excellent.
Sorry, I just got a few more things. Sorry. If you run the demos as well, there's a cleanup script here that's going to drop the database and everything that was created on server level. So yes, I'd like to beware of trustworthy. Thank you very much for listening to People is Driven, and I'll hand it over to Solar.
Yeah, Erland, very good. I think you just explained very well.